Hello and welcome to this edition of Bayou Time. I'm your host, Keith Whiteside, licensed clinical social worker with Charitable and Home Care. Very glad you're joining us. However, you may be joining us, we appreciate it very, very much. And we always like to get information from the people that are helping to make those decisions. Very glad to be joining us once again, Congressman Garrett Graves. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us again today.
Hey, you bet. It's great being back with you.
I appreciated that. We've been talking for the last week or so about the 2 year anniversary of Hurricane Ida. It's really interesting that 2 year anniversary hasn't necessarily meant that everybody has recovered. We're still dealing with a great deal of recovery. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things you've been hearing and some of the challenges that that people are still having.
Look, one of the biggest frustrations in the aftermath of a disaster is that the federal government ends up re-victimizing a lot of the hurricane victims. And they do that through bureaucracy, whether it starts out with FEMA and trying to get help there and jumping through all the hoops, or more importantly, this restore program where it's really hard to get recovery dollars and to get attention of Congress when you have something that affects one state, even if it's a big disaster, because the other 49 states realize that they're paying for it. And we were really successful in that just months after Hurricane Ida, we were able to come in and get recovery funds, long-term recovery funds, rebuilding homes, rebuilding the community. For example, after Hurricanes Laura, Delta, Zeta, it took over a year for those communities to get recovery assistance, in some cases even longer. But the problem is actually getting money out the door. And it's a combination of the federal bureaucracy and the state bureaucracy. So that's one issue. So again, good news is we're able to secure funds. Bad news is that folks get stuck in the bureaucracy, actually getting the funds out the door. Now, the other thing that I think is really good news and we're excited about is some of the progress we've been able to make in investments in hurricane protection, making sure that these communities are safer. And look, you and I have been talking about the Morganza to the Gulf project for years now, well over $400 million in federal funds that we have invested for that project, which is really important for Terrebonne and Lafourche parishes. And something else we did is we were able to get both all of the planning, engineering, and design dollars and get the entire $1.6 billion project authorized for construction. And this is this new Upper Barataria project, which is kind of that area, Bayou des Allemands, kind of the St. Charles Lafourche area, all the way up in Ascension Parish. And so a lot of progress being made in resiliency because, look, one of the things that's really important is we can't go ask people to, hey, rebuild your home, rebuild your business, invest in this area if it's vulnerable to hurricanes or floods. So it's a really important kind of complementary piece of the overall recovery.
Yeah, and again, fighting for those dollars and getting those dollars, it's nice to see that we have that money supporting that Morganza to the Gulf project because, quite frankly, the most devastating hurricane to ever come through this area, we had zero flooding. And the reason is because of the monies and the time and effort that were spent and the vision about making sure that we have that and protecting that. And so it's good to have those monies as we move forward.
It really is. And there's no question, that people have been saying for years, you're going to pay one way or another. And you can either spend millions of dollars now or billions of dollars later. And every day of the week, it makes more sense to be proactive on your investment, be proactive on resiliency efforts. And that's why Morganza is such an important project. And that's why, folks involved with Terrebonne Parish, with Terrebonne Levee and Conservation District, the state Coastal Protection Restoration Authority, all of the people we've been working with on this project, it's just so important that they've continued to be so invested in this project. And we've all been working hand in glove to push this thing against all sorts of obstacles and impediments. And as you got all that dirt in the ground, all the investment and just huge progress that's providing protection already.
Right. It really is. And one of the things that I know you fought really hard with a lot of our representatives here in our area about making sure that we could get housing and campers and that support program and bypassing some of those FEMA delays. And so it's just one of those things where we're still working on getting people out of those temporary housing, but I know y'all have been very focused on that program as well.
We have been in sort of a few different approaches, really three different. Number one, and an important shout out, working together with Sheriff Saunier on making sure that the law enforcement community, that his deputies could have a place to stay. And he was really leaning forward. We wanted to make sure we're working with him to ensure that his efforts would be federally reimbursed. And I want to thank him for his efforts to make sure his deputies had a place to be, making sure that some of the immediate housing, things like hotel rooms, could be made available. And then the last one is things like some of the trailers, and making sure that those could be available together with some of the long-term recovery or investment in rebuilding homes. So kind of three components in this disaster in Hurricane Ida. This one was a bit unique, and that the state of Louisiana stepped forward and said that they wanted to provide some of the initial housing, which was a little different in how things were done in the past. While, this was the first run and there were some imperfections, I do think that it worked better than the alternative of having FEMA at the helm, as we've seen in the past, just taking way too long for some of these efforts to get housing available.
Yeah, and again, we still see that housing is still an issue, as we see here in Terrible One on the Foosh. Is we've been talking about some of the restoration that needs to take place, but as we're moving forward with that, it's so very nice to see that we can look at a system that maybe didn't work so well with Laura and Delta like it did over to the west, and maybe making some of those recommendations about something that we can do a little differently. And so we appreciate all of that effort. So one of those things that we're always thinking about is what really is the temperature of how things are happening in DC and some of the things you're fighting for and some of those bills. Give us a little bit of an update about where things are and some of those timelines that you're asking about.
Yeah, so look, what's going to be happening for the rest of the year, I think, is going to be taking a lot of the oxygen out of the room. Is just the appropriations, the budget issues. So the fiscal year for the federal government ends on September 30th at the end of this month. And so we've got to have the appropriations bills done. It's always a big fight. And Keith, right now, what's going on is you've seen this crisis at the southern border. 5.8 million illegal immigrants have come in since President Biden has taken office. And it is really just overwhelming. And so there's a big fight now in using the budget process to stop this just open border system, the costing American taxpayers tens of billions of dollars. So it's going to be a big fight in the appropriations process. We're going to have a big fight over energy issues, watching as folks are unable to afford utilities, unable to afford gasoline costs, and trying to use this budget process to force more rational energy policies. In fact, policies that help Louisiana better than we've seen in recent years. Going to be very contentious, certainly a threat of a shutdown. I'm hopeful we're able to avoid that and just allow for rational policies moving forward on energy, on border, and of course on the outrageous spending that we've seen in recent years. So those are going to be big fights. But look, I want to give you some things that make us hopeful. One, in these appropriations bills that are moving through the House right now, we have tens of millions of additional funds for the Morganza to the Gulf project, for additional investments in hurricane protection for our communities. We have millions of dollars in there for the Houma Terrebonne Airport, making investments in the infrastructure there. That base isn't just increasingly important for offshore workers in the offshore energy industry, but also for autonomous vehicles. We're seeing brand new technology, really cutting edge technology that's going to be operating out of that airport. And so we're making investments complementary to that. So there's some important wins in there for our region that really, kind of incentivize us to get this legislation finished. We're also going to be working on larger FAA, federal aviation legislation related to improving the passenger experience and other investments. And we're going to have a big defense and a big farm bill we're going to be working on as well. So the rest of this year is going to be pretty busy. These are really big monumental bills that are going to be taking up a lot of time for the remainder of the year.
Well, I love it. One of those things where I can tell you, my father spent some time. They live about a quarter of a mile from the airport in East Houma,
Wow.
and in Houma Terrebonne. So at that airport, my dad was actually showing some people from out of town the history there, and where we had blimps there years ago in World War II, and some of the work that was done. But also, I was very impressed to hear him say that there's been an investment about expanding and being able to invest in that particular airport in Houma. And so, just so you know, the people that live there are so very thankful and appreciative of that. I'm glad you brought that up because I just experienced that last week.
Yeah, that airport or air base has a really interesting history, as you noted. It was the largest blimp base in the world, I believe, during World War II, right
Yep.
there in Houma.
Yes.
And we're seeing now where it's becoming a really important, I guess I'll call it a proving ground for autonomous vehicles or new types of aviation technology.
Mhm.
And we've been working closely with the airport and some of the innovators in making investments to ensure that that facility can have the right capabilities to allow for some of these new technologies and autonomous vehicles to be able to use that base. So we're really excited about it. It's got some unique characteristics in that there are flight paths that are away from populated areas that make it a more attractive place. It's so close to the Gulf of Mexico. But Keith, one thing that's really important, you talk about the budget process and all of these macro level issues in Washington, being able to talk about how this affects our hometown, our communities right here in South Louisiana, everything from the Morganza investments, the airport investments, right? In our Houma Terrebonne Airport, or even some of the investments that the appropriations bills have for the Houma Navigation Canal, deepening that, ensuring that companies like Thomasy, Gulf Island, Schwest, and others, and that huge important workforce in the maritime and the offshore service industry, that they remain competitive. They have the depth of the channel that's needed. Really, really important for the economic engine for our community, for the resiliency of our community, and just excited that we're able to have some local investments that are going to benefit from some of the work that we're doing in Washington right now.
And mentioning, I love the fact you mentioned that, because very often people want to say, okay, what are they really doing up there? How is it affecting us? How do we feel that? Well, those are some great examples right there about that, about maintaining the autonomous of what we need in our area, and the fact that you're fighting for those things and getting those things for us. I'm so very glad that we mentioned it, because it's about what happens for us. Everybody kind of wants to know how's this going to impact or affect me. But again, that's a great example of that.
It really is. And a lot of times all people know is that all this money is being spent. And, look, I want to be very clear. Some of the excessive money that's being spent right now under this American Rescue Plan, under the CHIPS Act, this Inflation Reduction Act, and the infrastructure bill that spent money on things that don't have a darn thing to do with infrastructure, giving just billions of dollars to the state of California being paid for by citizens of Louisiana. So one, we're trying to go back and claw back some of those funds. We had a negotiation earlier this year where we clawed back tens of billions of dollars, the largest rescission of funds in history. And now we're doing the appropriations process largely to try and reallocate funds to more important investments, and making sure that we're bending the curve or reducing the overall spending, because it's outrageous what the federal government spends today and the debt we're putting on the backs of our children and grandchildren, but also making sure, again, they're getting principled. We're making principled investments right here at home in South Louisiana that's actually going to result in multiplying the outcomes, meaning that you're going to get a benefit well beyond the actual investment or the cost of federal taxpayers in creating new jobs, creating new economic opportunity in the Bayou region. So really excited about being able to kind of reprioritize some of these dollars while overall reducing federal spending.
People having difficulty affording gas prices, affording their electricity bill. I know that flood insurance is very much on the top of so many people's minds in this risk rating 2.0. Give us a little bit of an update about where things are in Washington and what it is that we're trying to fight for to get some balance to that.
Yeah, sure. So Keith, just a little bit of background. So what happened is back during the Obama administration, they tried to move forward on something called risk rating 2.0, which was going to have an extraordinary increase in flood insurance rates in South Louisiana. We pushed back, and this was, I say we, this was before I was in Congress, but our delegation did, and ultimately won that battle. And President Obama walked away from it. President Trump picked up the same idea and started pushing it. I was in Congress then, we pushed back, and ultimately he abandoned the effort. President Biden comes in, he starts the same exact thing. We pushed back, expecting that they were going to stop, realizing how nonsensical this was. And they didn't. They kept doing it. They kept pushing it. This was no action from Congress. This is billions of dollars in additional insurance premiums that they're charging Americans. And they're doing it all on their own. I mean, this is similar to what you're seeing with student loans, where they're just going out waving a wand and effectively spending billions and billions of dollars, in fact, hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayer funds. So we have been fighting this. And the problem is that there's no transparency. They refuse to release the methodology showing how these rates are actually calculated. We found folks in St. Charles and Lafourche and Terrebonne parishes whose insurance rates have gone up from $650 a year to $8,000. I mean, these numbers are outrageous. People can't afford it. Now, flood insurance is the only thing that really is federally regulated or a federal program. But you have to keep in mind, Keith, what's happening is that in South Louisiana, we're seeing auto insurance rates that are state regulated, as well as home insurance rates that are state regulated skyrocket as well. And so all we know is that our overall cost for living in South Louisiana is becoming more and more challenging. You put it on top of the fact that we're seeing crazy energy policies coming out of Washington, driving up gasoline prices, driving up utility costs, and grocery costs and everything else. The average American family today is spending $700 a month more than just 2.5 years ago. $700 a month more.
Wow.
Groceries, utilities, gasoline, things along those lines are the biggest drivers. And so if you put unaffordable auto insurance rates, unaffordable home insurance rates, and the federal flood insurance rates going up as well, it just makes it really hard to do business. So we've been trying to work on all of this together, but obviously with the federal government being in charge of flood insurance, that's where we're focusing our efforts and where we can be most helpful. We've been, number one, investing in resiliency projects, which brings down flood insurance rates, but more importantly, trying to force the Biden administration to stop these unilateral efforts in driving up rates that are disproportionately affecting us in South Louisiana, trying to return back to the old system while we work through more investments in flood protection, because ultimately we don't want people to have unaffordable rates, but we also don't want people to be living in areas that are unsafe or prone to flooding.
Right. And so I appreciate those updates and what we're doing. As we close now, any things that are really important to what you're working on? I know we have some deadlines here on the 30th that you're trying to push through. What are some of the things that you're really focused on as we move forward? I know as a great representative of what we need in South Louisiana.
Yeah, well, look, I'm excited that we're coming in, going to be doing an event tomorrow on the Houma Navigation Canal deepening. We're going to be there together with the Port of Terrebonne,
Right.
with the parish president, many other stakeholders there on this new deepening agreement that's going to be signed with the Corps of Engineers. But look, for the rest of the year, the big things we're going to be working on is trying to help to get a budget or an appropriations deal done, but building upon some of the success we had in negotiating just a historic agreement earlier this year, where we were able to force this White House into a budget agreement where we're going to save $2.1 trillion, the largest savings in the history of the United States. So we're going to try and prevent a shutdown of the government, but try to use this appropriations process to get a secure border, to stop allowing this open border and citizens from other countries coming in and effectively spending Americans' checkbooks. We'll be working on better or more rational energy policies using America's energy resources, not China's. We're going to be working on trying to get this FAA or Federal Aviation Bill done, the Defense Bill done, the Farm Bill done, and importantly, getting local investments in South Louisiana.
And again, those local investments is one of those things with you being here for deepening the Houma Navigational Canal. It's one of those things where we see the monies that have been fought for bringing down, and people may think, well, why is that so important? Why do we have to deepen the Houma Navigational Canal? Because it creates so much more commerce for us to be able to open that canal up to larger and bigger industry, really making an impact for us.
It is, and I mentioned some of the companies, some of the workforce with Thomasy, with Gulf Island, with Schwest and others. If we don't deepen the channel, those facilities are going to become uncompetitive or not be able to handle the larger, deeper vessels that we're seeing trending all across the world. So it's a really important investment in the resiliency of our economy in this region.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Well, Congressman, I thank you so very much for your time. You always make time for us, which we appreciate. I'm so very glad that you'll be here and be able to do that, and the celebration of that. And so we thank you for what you're doing and for fighting the good fight and representing us so well here in South Louisiana.
You bet. Thanks, Keith. It was great being with you again.
All right, appreciate it. All right, guys, and that will do it for this particular segment of Bayou Time. Don't go anywhere. A whole lot more local programming right here on HTV.